Welcome to today's session of the Business and Trades Committee Subcommittee on Economic Security. Thank you very much indeed to Sir Chris and to your officials for joining us today. Sir Chris, we mark this terrible anniversary this week, the fourth anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. But we're in a situation where UK components are still turning up in drones, which are fired at the brave Ukrainians. Last year we imported potentially billions of pounds of oil products made with Russian oil. And this afternoon, Sky News is reporting that we have tankers sailing through the English Channel with up to $100 million worth of oil on board. How are we still in a position where we haven't yet shut down all trade of any sorts, either directly or indirectly, with President Putin's war machine?
Well, first of all, let's just acknowledge that it's the fourth anniversary yesterday, and we introduced a new set of sanctions yesterday, which perhaps we'll come on to. It is true that the Russian bear is a wily fox, to mix my metaphors, in the sense that, of course, they have sought to evade all our sanctions at every step of the way. And we've had to make sure that we are constantly updating and bringing in new elements of that process. We have had some significant successes. 99.6% of Russian trade to the imports to the US to the UK have stopped. We behave slightly differently from Russia in regard to humanitarian issues. So we still export to Russia pharmaceuticals and foodstuffs because we believe that that's a humanitarian issue, and we don't believe that we should be taking the war to the civilian population in Russia. It has had a big effect on the Russian economy. Something like 41% of their federal budget is now spent on the war. 16% interest rates they've got and 8% inflation, and Putin himself has acknowledged that it's had an effect. But I don't want to pretend to you that we're not going to have to continually we are always going to have to keep on ratcheting up the pressure, which is why yesterday, in relation to, for instance, some of those who've been facilitating the Russian shadow fleet, we've introduced sanctions against Western insurance group, which have been providing the insurance for that. We've also already sanctioned 520 fleet vessels in the Russian fleet, and we added another 40 or so yesterday. And we've also tackled the pipeline, as well as increasing both last October and then in December our action against Russian oil. In relation to crude oil that is refined, which I think is the point that you use the word potentially, because you're quite right, Mr. Byrne, that we don't know the precise figures of the amount of Russian crude oil that might have been refined in other countries and then brought to the UK, but that is one of the statutory instruments that will be laying very soon, precisely to be able to tackle that issue of oil that has been refined in other countries and then being brought into the UK. And the other thing that you asked about was why are there things that have been made in the UK that still end up in Russian drones? If you'll just allow me a slightly lengthy answer, it's firstly because we have three lists in essence which deal with all of this. First of all, there's the export control list, which is things which doesn't just apply to Russia, it applies to anywhere in the world where we apply for military and dual-use equipment. We have export controls. We also have the common high priority list, which is a whole series of things. Both of those lists and the second list is the things that are sanctioned. Both of those lists are agreed between ourselves, the US, the EU and Japan. So that's a shared list. And then we have a specific list of our own, which is taken out of those lists, where we know that there are some things that we don't produce, so it's unlikely that they would be going into the supply chain anywhere in the world. But there are issues where there are things where we know we have problematic or potentially problematic items or sectors, and countries, jurisdictions where we need to work hard to make sure that things aren't being diverted through to the end use, through to Russia. It does mean we don't have controls for everything. And so there will be some things that might have entered into the stream because they were sold long before the war in Ukraine, or because they are simply things that are not on either of those two international lists. But then the other element is that whilst we have worked very hard with industry and with other countries to try and make sure that there is no diversion of material that is licensed or is allowed to go to other countries through into Russia, nonetheless, we will be, I can announce today that we are going to introduce legislation to make sure that we tackle what is called sanction end-use controls. So anything that where we think it might be problematic because of where it will eventually end up, we would be able to insist on people getting a license before they're able to export.
I see, that's very helpful. So at the moment, not every item on the common high priority list is subject to strategic export controls. Is that the case?
Two different things, yes.
Yeah. And what do you think is the overlap between the two at the moment?
In terms of like a percentage?
Well, I think there's about 100 things on the common high priority list. How many of those items are subject to strategic export licenses?
I don't know the answer to that question. Does anybody, we might...
The classification is a little bit different as well because of the way export controls work and the codes and the way sanctions work. So it isn't a precise match. There is some overlap, but we'd have to take away the precise percentage of that. But there is certainly some.
It just sort of strikes me that if the West has basically agreed a list of common high priority items that we don't think should be allowed into Russia, perhaps there is a strong case for looking hard at whether they should all be subject to strategic export controls in order to deny them ever going either directly or indirectly to Russia.
That wouldn't necessarily deal with the problem that I think some of the newspaper stories have come up with, because some of those are items that wouldn't be on either list because they are so generic and so much part of... So some of the things that have been found to be in German 2 drones, for instance, are things that you would find in children's toys. I'm not sure that it would of necessity answer the problem that we may have, but I'm happy to consider it. As I say, the thing that we consider most clearly is, are there things that the UK doesn't produce at all, and therefore it's unlikely that we're going to be needing to, we need to take action on.
What therefore is the point of having a common high priority list?
Because we've determined that there's a whole series of things that we do want to sanction, and we want to make sure that they don't get through into the Russian economy. And we've done that on a joint basis. I think that's important wherever we possibly can in this. All these countries have wanted to debilitate the Russian military complex, and that's what our aim is, by denying them either cash or by denying them materiel.
So if there is, as you just said, a case for ensuring that common high priority list goods don't go to Russia, either directly or indirectly, then presumably there is a case, I'll put it no stronger than that, but presumably there is a case for ensuring that all of those items are subject to strategic export licensing controls.
I'll turn to my officials in a moment. I'm slightly, I think I want to reserve my position a little bit, just because we already control quite a lot of things, and we do thousands of licenses every year. And one of my concerns, as I know I've expressed to the committee before, is about making sure that we're making timely decisions on those licenses. So if we're to increase the number of things that would require licenses, would that be proportionate to the damage that we will be dealing with? And where would we find the resources to be able to do that swiftly enough?
Understood. How else will you stop common high priority list items getting to Russia?
Sorry, say that again?
How else then, if you're reserving your position, which is fair, on strategic licensing, what are the other ways in which you will ensure that common high priority list items don't get into Russia?
Well,
if they're made here, obviously.
This is the sanction list. I mean, it's a criminal offence for them to be going and provided by the UK. But as I say, some of those things are not produced in the UK at all, so it's not an issue for us. But they are produced by other countries in the list that I mentioned.
Okay. Well, could you therefore perhaps give us your analysis of the common high priority list items which are subject to strategic export licensing controls at the moment, and which are subject to other kinds of controls that you're exercising. So at least the committee can see where is there a set of items which are, if you like, sanction-free or indeed export license-free.
Everything on the common high priority list is sanctioned.
Is sanctioned.
End of.
Perfect.
Yes.
So
it's just that we don't produce some of those, which is why we have our own bespoke list of things where we are most concerned.
Yeah.
Because we do produce them, and they might be going to other countries, and some of them it's either in a sector which is significant to us, or but these are still sanctioned things. We're trying to make sure that they aren't diverted to a third to Russia via a third country, such as Kazakhstan. And I met with the Kazakhstan foreign minister this morning. It's one of the things that we discussed, and I'm meeting with him again tomorrow. And we have a list of countries of territories which are of concern to us. So that's the situation that we have at the moment. Yep. But when we are able to introduce, as I say, the legislation on sanctions end-use controls, I can never get this phrase right, sanctions end-use controls, then that will mean that those items going to those countries, if we are of concern, there would actually have to be a license to be able to send them. So they're not sanctioned to go to Kazakhstan, but they are sanctioned to go to Russia.
Okay. I'll bring in Alison Griffiths at this stage, but I want to just come back to this question of trade diversion in a second. Alison Griffiths.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just wanted to go back to the point about new sanctions coming in on the 4th anniversary. The key question I've got there really is why wait until the 4th anniversary, which, in all honesty, whilst it's an emotional and symbolic date, is actually an arbitrary date. And if the sanctions are needed, additional sanctions are needed, surely they should have been imposed earlier. And once you've imposed these new sanctions, what else do you have in your toolbox, and when will you deploy them?
Well, we tend to produce packages of sanctions, but partly because it makes it easier for those watching this space and industry in this sector to be able to understand exactly what's happening. So you could argue that we should identify each ship one by one, but we think it's better to do it in a package. You're right. In one sense, the date is arbitrary, but we have introduced a series of packages. I think this is the 9th series of packages. I'm looking to HMRC here, but I should be looking really to the Foreign Office.
The 9th in terms of statutory instruments, but we've done many more packages of designations on individuals and companies as well.
What kind of what's the sort of gap in between, or what's the trigger that pushes you to the next stage?
So within each individual, the world changes, and we note different versions of diversion or evasion of sanctions, and so we want to make sure that we tackle it. In particular, in relation to the Russian fleet, shadow fleet, it's not just that we wanted to tackle the fleet ships themselves, but we've also, yesterday, one of the things we spotted more recently was the insurance that is provided for them, so we've taken action against them. Likewise, in October, Foreign Office will correct me if I've got this wrong, but in October we took sanctions against 4 of the major crude oil producers in Russia, and then we added another 4 in December, and now we're tackling the pipeline. So sometimes it's just when we've spotted something new, and we try to do it as swiftly as we can. Often we try to work as closely as possible with our international allies, just because obviously there's a slight danger that if we've taken action and somebody else hasn't, then it might mean that effectively diverts the evasion to another territory.
Okay. Let me just round off on the common high priority list. So presumably the government has a pretty good map of the supply chains that go into producing anything that's on the common high priority list in the UK.
Yes.
That didn't sound terribly convincing.
No, because I'm not sure where you're going.
Well, there is a way of enforcing that we're not clear the government is pursuing. So we can see that there's a pretty tried and tested system of farming data coming in from banks, other financial institutions, and that does appear to account for a significant number of the investigations that are triggered. The alternative approach to farming data is going out and hunting people who are breaking the rules. And so proactively reaching out to companies that are in the supply chain that produces common high priority list items in this country and actually trying to track down bad behaviour, warning people in the supply chain, is a different approach to enforcement. So I'm just kind of interested in the model of enforcement that we're now operating to make sure that the controls on the common high priority list are as tight and as ferocious as they need to be.
Well, I mean, if you look at some of the common high priority list I've got here, and it's quite extensive, I'm not going to go through all of it, obviously, but it includes photosensitive semiconductor devices, transistors, other than photosensitive ones, diodes. I mean, it's a fairly specific list.
Yep.
And as I say, some of this is stuff that is produced in the UK, and we are rigorous about that. When somebody's applying for a license, it's a different matter from when they know that they're being sanctioned. But I don't know whether, Joe, you're looking like you want to say something.
So we do, in conjunction with DBT colleagues and others, undertake quite a lot of outreach and awareness raising to industry to educate them on lists and issues. We in particular undertake targeted engagement with exporters where we think their exports may be at high risk of diversion. That includes things like exports of luxury and dual-use goods. And we highlight the risks. We ask them to be really careful with their due diligence and know their supply chain, know their customers. That engagement has been generally positively received, and through that we've stopped 46 shipments, and we assess that it has disrupted at least 11 individual supply routes and networks for illicit supplies.
My question's a bit more, thank you for that. My question's a bit more simple, which is, have we got a list, or rather have you got a list of people who make the stuff on the common high priority list, and have you proactively reached out to all of them to make sure they understand their obligations?
Yes.
Great, that's a nice and clear answer. Let me just turn to trade diversion now.
Actually, sorry, would it just be useful for me to say which of the jurisdictions where we recommend extra due diligence?
Yes, that would be very helpful, although I'm going to come on to trade diversion in a second, but go on.
I'll do it whenever you want.
Okay, well, let's just have a look at data that you'll be very familiar with. So when we look at exports from the UK of, let's say, machinery exports to Armenia, we can obviously see a really large spike after the war began, after the second invasion began. Just moving on, similarly, Kyrgyz Republic, extraordinary increase in exports into Russia, and then finally on Uzbekistan, a similar kind of pattern. So we're obviously interested in what you're doing to try and make sure that exports from the UK to, let's say, one of these three countries are controlled if it is blindingly obvious that is then going on to Russia. And so I think let's just try and bring this to life a little bit. Let's just say that I'm making machine goods or cranes in the UK, and I'm sending them to my traditional dealers in, say, Turkey or UAE, but I've got a pretty good sense that those dealers are then shipping the stuff into Russia, and there's evidence that that stuff is then being used either on the battlefield or reconstructing war damage in Russia. What are the obligations that bite on the UK manufacturer in circumstances like this?
Well, first of all, as you just asked, we have a good knowledge of the people who would be engaged in such, who would be making such things, and the list that I was about to talk about starts with Armenia and includes Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Turkey, Thailand, Serbia, India, UAE, and Vietnam, and China. And Malaysia. So in each of those countries, we have shown extra diligence already. That's the situation as it applies now. And when you and I visited the Central Asia in 2023, we saw some of this and we talked to people about it. We, the UK government, have just had this, the C5, the Foreign Secretary is having meetings with all 5 countries yesterday and today, I think, or today and tomorrow, around some of these issues. And we have much better cooperation, I would say, now than we did back in 2023. Of course, just because there are cranes being sold to Uzbekistan doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to Russia. But the big difference that we will be able to make now is that if somebody is manufacturing cranes and sending them to Uzbekistan under the legislation that we're intending to bring in the very near future, the sanctions end-use controls, we will be able to say, you've actually got to get a license to be able to do that.
I see.
And that's one of the things I know the committee's been thinking about and pushing for, and it's one of the things that we're taking action on the back of your...
significant progress. Am I breaking the law today if I'm making a crane and selling it to my traditional dealers in the UAE, safe in the knowledge that they're probably sending it on to Russia?
Well, safe in the knowledge is quite an interesting phrase that you used there. If you are knowingly and or I think recklessly, knowingly and recklessly?
Definitely knowingly. Yes.
And knowingly expecting it to go to Russia, then you will be breaking the law. You would be that's an offence.
Okay. So in order to prove that I'm not doing that knowingly, what do I need to do?
Well, at the moment, you would talk to us, but when the legislation comes in, you will have to seek a licence.
Perfect.
And you will have to be able to prove, where it's going to go and where it's going to stay. Just as if I give another ECJU example, let's say you were producing protective vests, and you were selling them to the police force in another country. You would need to get a license, and one of the questions we might ask you is, where is that going to be used? Because if it's going to be used in an area that is of, to enable repression, then you wouldn't get the license.
So at the moment, I commit an offence if I am basically sending goods to an intermediary knowingly, in a way that allows that to then go into Russia.
If you are knowingly evading sanctions, then you are breaking the law on sanctions, and that is a criminal offence.
And there are probably know your customer rules that I ought to be going through today. But the new legislation is going to put this beyond doubt, basically.
Completely, because you will have to apply for a licence for any of these. And I mean, obviously, the precise legislation has still to be laid, but we intend to do so as soon as we can.
Good. In this Parliament, or do you think that will be a King's Speech measure?
In this session, you mean? I don't know the answer to that, and that's normally for the Chief Whip and the Leader of the House to decide.
But you're expecting to do it this year?
I want to do it as soon as possible, so yes.
Thank you. Charlie Maynard.
Afternoon. Just going back to the pipeline and the package. So, as per your announcement yesterday, targets one of the world's largest oil pipeline companies, PJSC Transneft, responsible for transporting over 80% of Russian oil exports. This is the 9th package. Why wasn't this in the first package? Because I don't understand. This is huge. Mm-hmm. It's stationary. It's obvious. Why are we taking 9 sanctions and 4 years to get round to sanctioning something which has got enormous amounts of money coming out of it for the Russians?
Well, if I can very briefly defend the previous government, it is true that back in 2022 we had, for all sorts of different reasons that were discussed in the then Foreign Affairs Select Committee, it was unclear to some members of the government whether the UK was creating a new sanctions developing policy of its own after Brexit or not. Sometimes we are proceeding as closely alongside our EU colleagues as we possibly, and where we can with the US as well, alongside them as possible. I don't know why this specifically wasn't addressed before, but the Foreign Office might.
We've gone through in total more than 3,000 sanctions designations under the Russia regime so far, and in the energy sphere, that has progressively included more and more of the Russian oil sector. So in particular, getting the 4 Russian oil majors done by last autumn. Transneft operates pipelines through which flow 80% of Russia's oil. So it has taken some time to get to the point of doing that sanction, partly because as time goes on, we assess the impact of our sanctions and the risks to market stability. Back in 2022, when we first started putting sanctions in place, there was a spike in the oil price, which is very counterproductive to the aim of our sanctions. So we have proceeded by covering more and more of the Russian energy sector over time as we assess what the likely consequences of doing that will be. And we now see that the global market has enough capacity that we can go further and do more.
I'm resisting pulling up a 4-year oil price chart right now, but we could do that. But I mean, the oil price has moved around a lot in that period. I find it very weird that we are choosing to continue to not sanction a massive pipeline coming out of Russia with oil in it on account of markets. And I don't think that's what our country wants to have happen. And are we really, what on earth has been going on for 4 years? If we keep saying we're sanctioning Russia, but this huge pipeline's gushing oil into Europe and into the UK, presumably, or is that absolutely not into the UK?
No, it's not into the UK.
Right. Okay. But we're by all the more reason to be sanctioning it. In terms of we should be setting an example to European allies to say we're sanctioning it, get on with it.
Well, we have taken a leadership role where we can, but we haven't always been able to take all of our European colleagues with us, is the truth of the matter.
We have to?
Well, it's better...
on something like that, why not lead?
It is better... I think it is better when we do. It's just more effective. And similarly, we added 175 entities, which are part of the illicit Two Rivers trading network yesterday. Now, I mean, I could read what your comments as being welcoming the fact that we announced this yesterday, but I take the point about working at pace. I sympathise with what you're saying.
Well, Minister, thank you. And is it possible to get a list of what's still not sanctioned?
No.
Okay, but then...
It would be a very bad idea for us to publish such a thing, because we obviously want to reserve our rights to be able to take further action wherever we can spot it. And sometimes the fact that we've spotted it is something that we don't want to make public until we take the sanctions measure.
Fair enough, but what about publishing a set of principles as to why you're not sanctioning things? Because clearly, things like this pipeline you've known about for a long time, that's not an oversight. So you've made a decision not to sanction it. Perhaps that was right. But there are a whole load of other things out there which you are also presumably still in the ratchet up list, which are not being sanctioned. And I think, is palladium on there? Is fertilizer on there? Are we really kind of keeping Russian exports of fertilizer open? Maybe you'd like to answer that. Are we?
I don't know the answer to that question, but again, it will be difficult to produce an argument for why we're not sanctioning something without effectively recommending people to use it, and for that matter, producing a list of things that we might be in the future thinking of sanctioning. The bigger point I would make is we've done a pretty comprehensive job. It's always going to be a constant ratchet up. And I'm sure there will be other things that we spot in the next 6, 9, 12 months. I hope that we won't be needing to do this in a year's time because we will reach a ceasefire, but I'm sceptical.
So I would be more confident if we didn't have a pipeline which had 80% of Russia's oil exports coming out on it, which 2 days ago was still not on that list. That's a big chunky thing. So are there other assets? Is that by far the biggest asset? And the other assets are of that size still that are not sanctioned by the UK?
I would say no. I think having sanctioned all of the oil majors and this specific company that runs the Russian pipeline system, I would say there is nothing of comparable size.
Metals, fertilizers.
Metals we have banned a lot of through our different statutory instruments. Fertilisers, I believe, is part of the exemption for foodstuffs related goods for the sake of global food security.
We're still taking fertiliser from Russia because we need their fertiliser.
No, 99.6% of all imports from Russia have been stopped to the UK.
But are we...
sanctioning is different from preventing imports.
Chair, if it's possible, are we able to have broad categories to say we are still not sanctioning metals?
I'm not going to produce a list of things that we're not sanctioning. I think that would be a complete own goal.
Why?
Well, because it's effectively declaring our impotence in some regard, and it would also imply that we think we should sanction in this area, but we're choosing not to. I think it's an odd request.
But Sir Chris, there are some strategic sectors where we have said, as a country, that we're not going to implement sanctions. So, for example, life science products. For example, you said at the top of the meeting,
pharmaceuticals and foodstuffs.
There will be some goods that we don't want to ban exports of. Mr. Maynard is then asking, well, what are the goods or services that we are still importing from Russia?
We're not. Well, we've removed 99.6% of all imports. I can try and find out what the 0.4% is if you want, but we are about as comprehensive as possible. And I heard the comments that have been made in previous debates about us relying on Russian oil and gas. That simply isn't the case. I'm
going to come back to oil derivatives in a second, but can I just bring in Mr. Cooper on this point?
Thank you, Chair. You're talking there about the shutting down of imports. I'm concerned about fish because I was astonished to find that we actually are importing Russian fish, perhaps not knowingly, because it seems to go via China, and Russia ramped up its exports into China. One figure I've seen says that it rose by 15% after the invasion to something like $2.5 billion worth of fish going to China. At this point, it seems to be washed and it becomes Chinese, and it then comes into the UK largely in the form of block fish, which I think goes into things like fish fingers and things like that. That's sanctions dodging, isn't it? This is a cash crop for Russia.
Well, it's sort of the equivalent, isn't it, of the diversion that we're trying to tackle where we sell something from the UK to a third country and then it goes into Russia. So there is another version, just as there is with oil. It's why we're taking the action we are on crude oil that is refined in other countries, which will similarly be banned from import into the UK. And I note that the word you used earlier, Mr. Byrne, was potentially, because we don't know the precise figures and we don't know them either, by definition, in a sense. So it is a decent point that you're making. I haven't got specific numbers or details on that. If you have, we'd be grateful to have them. I'm not sure whether anybody else here has.
I haven't got details on fish, but we are certainly checking imports for sanctions. We made seizures of 30 seizures in relation to sanctioned imports. We've also got 2 import-related criminal investigation cases ongoing and 2 more currently being scoped. So we are definitely taking enforcement action on the small remaining percentage of imports.
And just to explain that obviously HMRC has responsibility for anything goods that cross the border in or out, which is their responsibility, hence HMRC being here. Off-sea is also Treasury, but off-sea is us, which is DBT. Yeah. And sanctions policy lies with the Foreign Office.
Anything further on that specifically, Mr. Cooper?
No, thanks. That's
okay.
Great.
Let me just come to oil derivatives then, in that case.
Yeah, we spoke about it in the Chamber a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
So India is importing oil and gas from Russia. It has got a number of refineries. I think 4 out of 5 of them are state-owned, the 5th being Reliance. They are processing that oil and gas into petrochemical products and exporting it, including to the UK. So essentially, we are receiving a mixed bag of petrochemical products, some of which are Russian product, into the UK, various products. The Europeans have shut down that trade. We haven't. You said by spring, the windows are open, it's warm. Can you say by recess? Because there is a war on. We really, and I'm not trying to give you individually a hard time here.
No,
I know you're very keen to get it shut down, but
yeah.
we really do need to get this shut down as fast as possible because we should not be buying this product.
Yes, I completely agree, and we are taking that action, and it will happen very swiftly. I'm just always slightly hesitant about timetables, because in my 25 years in Parliament, I've never known a minister manage to deliver a timetable that they thought they were going to deliver in terms of legislation being on the statute books. But unless my DBT colleague wants to, Anna, no.
Yeah, as you say.
In the end, the actual timing it ends up being down to the Leader of the House and the Chief Whip.
I think very swiftly was the phrase you used.
It was, and
quite close to imminently, but it's not quite imminently.
These are words that have been used, and for that matter, spring. And I hate to go back to Julie Andrews, but I have confidence that spring will come again.
Okay. Anything further on that?
Well, yes. I mean, is the UK supportive of a full maritime services ban on Russian-related products or not?
I can't remember where we're going on that. Where are we going on that? That's Foreign Office, I think.
We've spent a lot of time with our European colleagues on this.
Yep.
And, we can see the ambitions of the Maritime Services Act that they are proposing. We understand that our American colleagues are not quite there yet. We want to try and make sure that at least the UK and the EU are joined at the hip on this.
Yes, we would support moving to a full maritime services ban on Russian crude oil and refined oil products, working with international partners. So we continue to discuss that with the Europeans.
And just on the Europeans, Americans, so does that mean if we won't do it without the Europeans, but we are okay to do it without the Americans? Is that?
Well, we moved in October and December without the Americans, but with the EU.
Yes, I think we would like to work with as many international partners as possible, but yes, I think in particular the EU.
And just running a little bit further, so maritime services, we've got a big services economy. What finance, insurance? How confident are you in terms of shutting down the relationships on finance between Russia and the UK, because they have been very substantial, and how much is that being shut down?
I mean, a lot of banks are sanctioned. Russian banks are sanctioned already, and there, from very early days, there was a large amount of disinvestment in Russia, which was prompted by the sanctions regime that we'd instituted. I've already referred to the fact that one of the effective facilitators of the shadow fleet is the insurance mechanism, and that's one of the things that we've taken action against now. I mean, it's quite shocking, frankly, that exists in the West as it is. And to answer your question, of course, we would always like to be able to take all of our international partners with us. And when we're entirely on our own, it's less effective. But if it's us and the UK and the US, or us and the EU, then we do want to be able to proceed where we can.
So if the EU is up for it, we won't let American reluctance get in the way of acting.
That is right. That is correct.
And give us a sense of the timetable on which you hope to move for this. You can go anywhere. You can pick a season. You can say imminently. You can say very swiftly. Give us a sense of your ambition.
Pick a year. I mean, I'm very reluctant to give a timetable unless the Foreign Office has got a timetable in its mind.
I think we would like to move as soon as possible, but it's dependent on European partners.
Okay, thank you. The Graham Bill, I think, is also making progress in the United States Congress. I mean, do you have a sense of how much of a gap there is between legislation in Congress on sanctions and how much there is a gap between us? So we know within Congress there are colleagues who are trying to get tougher on sanctions. Are we keeping pace with them? Is that an analysis that we've done?
Well, obviously, the US is a mixture of processes, because you've got Congress and then you've got the administration, and trying to make all of that work in harmony is an important part of what we're trying to do. I'm not aware of us being behind Congress on any particular pieces of legislation, but again, it's a Foreign Office responsibility.
I think the Graham Bill includes a whole range of different measures, including a lot of things on tariffs, for example, and we don't necessarily always coincide on exactly the same measures, but we have coordinated with the US in terms of the objective of raising the economic pressure on Russia, and we continue to do so.
Okay. Just before we move on to enforcement then, I just want to round out the conversation on particular goods and particular countries. So obviously we wrote to you about the Signet case. I don't want you to comment necessarily on the Signet case specifics, but thank you very much indeed for your letter, which was very welcomed. I think you are reviewing the decision about licensing that was made in that case. But
let's say two things about that.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to just ask you a broader question about the case, which is the substance involved, I think, was pre-peg that goes into essentially making drone wings. And it provoked the question for me, which is, how do you look at the items in the round that we need to prohibit based on what we learn on the battlefield?
Well, I think that's a constant process, and if I'm honest, I'm actually grateful to journalists when they manage to dig up stuff that we haven't been able to spot ourselves. It's a helpful process, not one that I want to criticise at all. I should say that obviously, if the decision is made that Signet needs to get a licence because it is a controlled on the control list, then they will have to go through that process and they have to prove where it's going and so on. But nothing has thus far shipped. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. Let's
May I just,
and then we'll move on to
just to highlight, and I take your point about journalists being useful. I mean, this is bypassing the blockade, how Hong Kong feeds European technology into Russia's war in Ukraine, which you've probably seen already by Freedom Hong Kong. I mean, very helpfully, there's a list of UK exports going through to Russia, and then even more helpfully, there's a list of trading companies which have been sanctioned or not sanctioned by the UK and various other countries, and how much they're selling. So it might be worth a conversation, because, I mean, what I don't really know, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, is when you get something like this, obviously you have to verify it. But if you do verify it, how long does it take you to shut those down, in terms of get them on a list that tells people do not trade with these companies?
I'll let answer come in just one sec, but just in relation to Hong Kong, for instance, I think I'm right in saying that only a couple of months ago there was a director of a UK firm who has just been sent to prison for exports to Hong Kong without a licence of sanctioned goods. Or not sanctioned goods, sorry, of controlled goods. Sorry, do you want to answer the bigger question?
So when we use sanctions designations in order to take action against a bad actor involved in sanctions circumvention, it really depends very much on the circumstances, how long it takes to build the case for that. We have to investigate, what we know about it, what the evidence backs up, and build and rigorously test whether there is a legally robust case for making that decision, and then it's a decision for ministers.
I'm going to ask how long is a piece of string, because I mean, there's a war on. There's quite a lot of information in there. You may not be able to validate everything perfectly, but there might be enough circumstantial evidence to be like, well, this is a bad enough actor that we want to be stopping this. And do you have to have perfect evidence and you can't move, or do you actually just make some kind of informed decisions there?
I think it doesn't have to be 100% perfect evidence. There has to be reasonable grounds to suspect that it's an involved person under the terms of the sanctions regime. And of course, we have to juggle all of the possible options for designations and prioritise within that.
Okay, let's move. Sorry, please.
Just to make a quick complementary point, there are also trade sanctions. So if this is an activity or a good or a service that is going to a sanctioned destination it shouldn't do, or there is some sort of diversion risk, that is also where OTC and HMRC would come in, potentially with an enforcement role and with a sort of educational and deterrence role as well. And we would use that report amongst many open source pieces of information, sources of intelligence, and we would build a picture, and we do an awful lot of building that picture, and then we will do proactive outreach to companies in the UK that may be perhaps interacting with those sorts of entities. So there's a sort of a network and a set of complementary actions we can use: designations, trade sanctions enforcement, a whole range of things that we can work together to work out the best way of tackling these.
And of course there may be malefactors, and we obviously seek to chase them down either through HMRC's activities or through our own. But I would say that in the vast majority of cases, industry works closely with the department to be able to get to a good set of outcomes. It's a complex mix, is the truth, because we've got not just financial sanctions, trade sanctions, transport sanctions and immigration sanctions, and that whole mix is quite complex for some people to be able to negotiate.
And you're about to get end-use licensing as well with your new bill. Okay, let's turn to enforcement then. Mr Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. The Office for Trade Sanctions Implementation, OTSI, looked very business at the start. It was supposed to crack down on companies dodging Russian sanctions and ensure that companies who are found to be dodging strict trade sanctions will face tougher penalties. So where are we 18 months in, though? Looking at it from the outside, we're not seeing much enforcement action there, and it does seem heavily reliant on self-reporting as well, which obviously, if you are a bad actor, then you won't be turning yourself in. So what difference has OTSI made?
Well, first of all, it has only had 18 months, and it isn't able to investigate things that happened before its powers came into operation, obviously. So I would expect the numbers to go up of instances over future years rather than to go down. We have got about 5 cases which are quite close to conclusion and could lead to substantial measures being taken. You're right that you call it self-reporting. It's mandatory self-reporting. So we made sure that the legislation made sure that OTSI was going to have things reported to it that it would then be able to take action on. Significant numbers of cases have been either closed because there is nothing to pursue, or have been referred directly to HMRC or to other government departments to be able to take further action. I'm confident that it's operating effectively, but it's part of a suite of operations, and it works very closely with HMRC. And with all of that pattern, I think we have got pretty effective enforcement of our sanctions regime. I would argue that it's more effective than any other country that I have yet seen.
Okay, and so OTSI, then we may not be seeing results in OTSI's score chart then, we may see it on HMRC's scorecard rather than on OTSI's then.
Yes, I've got the numbers somewhere. I think we've had 185 potential breaches that were reported. 5, as I say, are at a late stage. 117 closed, 57 reported to HMRC. I don't know whether HMRC wants to take up the baton.
So in 2025 we had 42 referrals from OTSI, 19 are still under review for which action we are going to take. 8, there was no further action either because when we looked into it there was no evidence of an offence or it was below our criminal threshold. 7 cases, however, linked to existing HMRC investigations, and we are using the information from OTSI to support those investigations. We also had further 2 referrals which had already been referred to HMRC as voluntary disclosures. We referred 1 case to the NCA because it fit better with theirs, and I think they may have had a related case. And then we had 5 of those referrals were deconfliction checks from OTSI to make sure that they were not going to conflict in anything they might do with work that HMRC already had in hand.
Okay, and Minister, you talked about the suite of options that you've got. I was very interested that in May last year the government said it would explore the possibility of cross-departmental joint sanctions intelligence function, which sounds like the old phrase, a bit of joined-up thinking, to underpin all this sanctions enforcement. What progress has been made on that? Do you have a kind of cross-cutting or overarching body that's drawing together the strands of this suite?
Well, that was in response, because when we came into office in 2024, one of the things we said that we would do was that we would review the whole sanctions regime, and that's some of the decisions that were made yesterday were on the back of that, and some of the announcements that we're going to be making in the next few weeks, and some of the legislation we'll be introducing will be because of the review that was done last May, and that's when the comment was made. I think Anna's going to say a couple of words in a moment, but my impression is that we work very closely between all the different organisations. I'm not sure that I want to create an additional committee or anything like that, but Anna.
Yes, well, just to build on that, each of the enforcement bodies has their own intelligence function of one kind or another, and we have been looking at sort of improving the join up across that. Is already working very well, actually, with the way that our different intelligence functions work across HMRC, OTC, OFC, a whole range of enforcement agencies. We're all working together better already, because I think that it was a clear impetus and a clear call to action to do more there, and that is really driving an increase in our proactive enforcement work, I think, across the board, it would be fair to say. We are looking at what further steps we might want to take to go further with that join up, but certainly already working closely together, really reaping the rewards of sharing intelligence, working more efficiently. That is already bearing fruit in some of the operational work that I think we're all doing. So it is something that we hope to say more on as we develop that work further, but there is certainly already really excellent join up as a result of that recommendation coming out.
Okay. And again, Marissa, just to back what you said there about how you measure yourself against other countries, how do we do that? I mean, we obviously want to avoid marking our own homework or believing the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves. How do you measure our performance against other countries?
That's why I was somewhat hesitant about the way I said it, because, to be honest, it's only anecdotal. I've not seen any categorical, definition of different countries' activities. We try to work closely, and of course the majority of our historic sanctions regime would have been operated through the European Union, though we still had an independent right to be able to take sanctions, as we did in relation to Iran, for instance, separately from the EU. But in the main, this is something that we've got up from scratch since Brexit.
Okay, thank you.
So, Anna, the Minister kindly wrote to us on the 16th of February just setting out what was quite a comprehensive set of replies about the capabilities of OTC. So you have, I think, about 40 staff now, is that correct? Yep. And what has been the challenge, what have been the biggest challenges in putting that team together, and is it now, broadly speaking, in your judgment, Minister, at the right size?
It's broadly speaking at the right size. Obviously, it's going to be taking on some additional responsibilities in the near future, and we will need to review to make sure that we have got the right number of people for it.
Okay. Anna, anything to add?
No, nothing to add, thank you.
Okay. And the number of cases that have been proactively opened by OTC is 14. So I think that's about 8% of the total cases that have been opened. I mean, that sounds quite low. From the 40 people that you've got, how many are actually proactively investigating sanctions breaches?
More for you, operationally.
Would you like us to take that? Okay. So we, I don't think it's possible to give a clear answer on that, because the way that we are set up means that we work across different functions in OTC. So I'm hesitant to give a definitive number on the people working on proactive enforcement. All of the 40 people in some way or other are supporting our efforts to move towards more proactive enforcement. That is something obviously that is a ramping up exercise, and we fully expect that 14 to increase quite dramatically over time as we do more proactive enforcement. I would also use the opportunity to say that actually the mandatory reporting that we get in is incredibly rich. It is from financial institutions and from legal firms. Both of those are involved in trade transactions, contracts, the financing. The material that we are getting through from those reports is incredibly rich. It is really helping us to build our proactive enforcement repertoire and really drive that forward. So while it's in some cases is self-reporting, sometimes it's third-party reporting, and either way it is a really rich picture, and actually a novel area, because we haven't had mandatory reporting in trade sanctions enforcement before the creation of OTC. So it is a very rich scene that we are looking to mine further. Okay,
in that case then maybe we could just ask you for an organisational breakdown of OTC, just so we've got a sense of who is doing what in there. We can do that in correspondence.
We'll give you whatever we can. My only sensitivity is just about if we don't want to expose any kind of
secrets.
Yes. Well, not state secrets, but stuff that might enable those who want to evade sanctions to do so.
Fair enough. Mr. Maynard.
Minister, Joanne. So, as I understand it, HMRC is responsible for criminal enforcement of sanctions, and that's one of the legal basis for that is the Customs Excise Management Act 1979, or CEMA, and Section 68. And inside Section 68, there's Section 2, or Point 2, which is the intent to evade clause. This is the more serious offence where a person is knowingly concerned in the export of goods with intent to evade a prohibition or restriction. How many people have been arrested for that in the last 15 years?
I don't have figures on numbers arrested. We've got 21 live criminal investigations. Of those live criminal investigations, we've just had recently 2 charging decisions, and there are 3 individuals in those 2 cases.
And just to be clear, that you will know that in many instances what HMRC moves towards is a compound settlement, but they wouldn't do that in relation to the issues that you're talking about because that would be a case of deliberate evasion, and then they wouldn't use compound settlements.
I want to park compound settlements and just go for this. So anecdotally, I've been told, and I don't know whether this is true or not, there have been 2 arrests in the last 15 years, and obviously, different administration and everything else. But I would really, if you wouldn't mind checking that and just telling us how many people have, individuals or companies
we'll write back to you.
Have been arrested on that, because if it's anything like that, obviously we've got a really big problem, because there's an awful lot more bad actors than that.
Yep.
And what that means is that HMG has been not doing what it should have been doing.
Or you could argue that it means that the legal threshold is inappropriate and needs to be changed, or whatever it may be.
Which way, we've
it's
got
a perfectly
really
legitimate point, and I'm very happy to write to you about it.
So if we could go there, because what I'm worried about is essentially we've got a massive gap in enforcement, and bad actors probably know that. And if we are being serious about sanction enforcement, we need to close that gap really, really fast. And I don't know what all the answers are on that, and I'm not expecting you to have all the answers on that, but I really do want to let's get the facts open there so we actually know what the state of play is.
Happy to do that.
Thank you.
Do you want to move on to compound settlements?
Yes. So first of all, it's a weird euphemistic term which I didn't understand until somebody described to me today as shakedowns, and that's I'm not over the shoulder on that one, but essentially it was like somebody says, I've made a technical error. You go, yes, you have, and we'll have some money for that, please. And they hand over the money, and it's quits, which is possibly all right. But if that's all that's going on, and we're talking, ultimately what I'm looking at is, my sense is we've got people doing tens of millions, hundreds of millions of bad acting stuff with Russian oil and gas swimming around on a massive scale. And when we have got our entire compound settlements, and that's it, because there were no HMRC enforcements in terms of money that we've received information on, of £2.5 million over 4 years, and we think about the scale of the war in Ukraine, I feel disappointed and worried.
I know, but I think, well, first of all, I want to say that I think the vast majority of our sanctions are holding and are being abided by UK business and by UK financial institutions and everybody. I think it is an example of success. I'm not complacent about that. I want to do everything I possibly can to make sure that Putin doesn't win, and so on. But now, compound settlements are not. Don't just. This is beyond. I'm about to stray beyond my knowledge, probably. And
Let that stop you, though, Sir Chris.
No, you've saved me many times, Mr. Byrne. But just on this occasion, compound settlements are part of the way that HMRC does a lot of its business. So, for instance, if there was an investigation into your income tax, then they might come to a compound settlement as well. But it. And there are legitimate questions to answer, but go on.
And just before you do, let me frame it in this way. So the evidence that we have taken from a range of experts in this field delivers 2 points. One, the risk of a compound settlement which doesn't name the perpetrator means that we don't have the proverbial heads on spikes, and therefore we lose a deterrent effect, which is tried and tested practice in the United States.
Yep.
So OFAC have been pursuing that kind of strategy for a long time very successfully. The second issue, as Mr. Maynard says, is that when we look at the total number of pound notes received in compound settlements, it looks quite low given the kind of evidence that we hear about the scale of sanctions evasion. So we're concerned as a committee that compound settlements are undermining the deterrence of the enforcement activity that is being undertaken, and we're not sure that it's on the right scale.
So if I just answer the first bit and then Joe will answer the second bit. So one of the questions, a perfectly legitimate question, is around whether we shouldn't be publishing more details about, not just the nature of what has happened, but naming and shaming people. There will be undoubtedly an advantage to doing so because of the deterrent effect that you've referred to. The downside of it is that by definition a compound settlement is a sort of agreement with the other party. And if that then prevented them from coming to an agreement, then we might be in a process where we were going to be pursuing legal action which might not be successful and would incur significant costs for government as well. So I incline towards greater transparency, and it's one of the things that we're looking at how we can achieve over the next few months, because I take that first point.
Say more about that? What do you mean you're looking
well,
at it?
Well, it's not entirely... I'm not Treasury, so HMRC would have to make a determination about whether they could go in that direction. And there's another problem for them, which is that many of these issues are subject to quite tight confidentiality issues, not because we've insisted on it, but because of the whole premise on which the reporting is done. So they have to be able to work their way around that legal element. But Joe's probably better equipped to answer some of that.
Yes, so we have very much been listening to and have heard the concerns about the transparency around compound settlements. We do recognise that greater transparency can be helpful in terms of both deterrent effects and also in terms of lessons learned for other companies and individuals to see what has happened. We are currently bound by strict taxpayer confidentiality that runs, it's not specific to sanctions or strategic exports, that's part of our wider confidentiality that HMRC operates under in relation to taxpayers' affairs. So we are looking at as options both what more we can what more information we can currently put in the public domain. We're also looking at options for giving ourselves the powers to have greater legal powers to name. That's in the early stages of work at the moment.
And would require legislative change, just to be clear. That's my anxiety about the pace that we might be able to move that on that.
And we are also under the current constraints under which we're operating, we are moving to make more compound settlements a condition of them that the person or company agrees to be identified in appropriate cases where we think that is justified, and one of those might be that the company itself, for example, has put some information in the public domain already.
Okay, I mean, it's obviously a problem if the state has decided to delegate enforcement activity to a part of government that has to work in such secrecy that the deterrent effect is completely undermined. But
I want to get to greater transparency, and I want to get there as fast as possible. It's not directly within my department, but it's one of the things that I want to drive forward.
Okay, and so what I'm taking away from this conversation is that this is something that you're looking at, and that you will come back to us or to Parliament with a decision.
Well, I mean, we would have to come back to Parliament because it would require legislation, and I'm not even sure whether it would be primary or secondary legislation.
We're seeking advice on that at the moment.
Exactly.
Sorry.
We're seeking advice on what legislation would be needed at the moment, so I can't answer that at the moment.
So you're reviewing legislative options?
We are, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Just very quickly on cryptocurrency, this will be a debate obviously that comes up a lot on Monday in the elections bill as regard to cryptocurrency donations and political finance. But just for the purposes of our session today, it would be just to get a take from you on what is the scale of the problem with cryptocurrency donations as an enabler of sanctions evasion?
Go on, Anna.
What is the casework telling you about this problem?
I mean, it clearly is, and it's something actually that Ofsted and the Treasury has been looking at and driving some sort of cross-Whitehall work on. It is obviously something that we are alive to. It is, it is part of the wider kind of financial crime picture, and an increasing part of that. So we are aware of it. We are alive to it. We are working with partners across government, and in particular, the Treasury is leading some work on this that we are docking into, and will be looking out for this. This is clearly there is a trend.
But I'm interested in just characterise the nature of the problem and the scale of the problem based on the casework that you've got at the moment. Is this a big problem, a little problem, a marginal problem?
I think it would be difficult for me to speak to the sort of how in any meaningful way I think about how it's featuring in our casework. It is certainly something we are aware of. We know that others are seeing it too. There is a collective view that this is a growing issue that we need to tackle, and we are going to tackle it. I'm not really in a position to say more sort of precisely about how it is feeding through in our casework, but it's absolutely something we are looking out for and looking to build a picture on, and indeed then play that back to the industry so that they can improve their compliance and due diligence efforts.
And there are some particular platforms that have been named in open source reporting on this, including Tether. But I mean, are there other particular flavours of cryptocurrency which appear to be turning up more often than others?
I was simply going to add that, of course, we have already designated Grinex and Mir cryptocurrencies, which are effectively the infrastructure behind a ruble-backed cryptocurrency token A7A5, which you'll know about. And Ofsted is working in partnership with the multi-agency Crypto Cash Fusion Cell, which has enabled quite a lot of intelligence-led enforcement against UK-based sanctions offenders. It goes to the point again, which is it is a suite of bodies here. We have HMRC, we've got Ofsted, we've got OTSI.
Yeah. Joanne, is there anything you want to add to the picture that we need to understand about the use of cryptocurrency donation and sanctions evasion?
Nothing on cryptocurrency precisely, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm going to just switch focus for a moment to the...
Sorry, Chair, just to be clear, it will be Ofsted that would have the primary responsibility for that, the Office of Financial Sanctions Implementation.
Yeah, okay. We're just going to switch focus now to the occupied territories. Mr. Maynard, do you want to kick off?
Yes. I was headed somewhere else. So, I mean, I guess we as a committee, we've looked into this and we are very worried about the loopholes in terms of product being produced in the occupied territories, which are occupied, and coming onto British shores. And we can focus on the goods, but we also really, really want to focus on the services, because I think that's every bit as big, if not a lot bigger. And we will be writing, perhaps with the Chair's permission, a letter of various concerns that we've heard from various parties, including Amnesty, about those gaps. But if you could give a flavour as to what you as a team are doing to close those gaps, goods and services, that would be really appreciated.
And I've met with Amnesty as well. I had them in my office a couple of weeks ago, I think, just before they came to see members of the committee as well. Look, just to start a bit from first principles, because I think it's important in regard to this, the settlements are illegal. And they are morally repulsive, and we have made, I mean, that is a long settled view of successive British governments, and we have been very clear with the Israeli government that not only the things that the Prime Minister said earlier today about Hamas and being, how they have to surrender their arms and not be a part of the future of Gaza, but equally that the drive towards additional Israeli settlements is legally wrong and morally repugnant. The ICJ ruling of 2024, some of which we are still considering in quite considerable depth, one of the things it says is, of course, that we would have any country would have to draw a distinction between what happens in a settlement and what happens in the rest of Israel, so part of what we are very clear about is that although there are preferential tariffs for goods from the rest of Israel, they do not apply to goods from settlement areas, settlement postcode areas, and similarly. We do not encourage any British businesses to be engaging in any shape or form in the settlement areas. Now that includes, if you make, bulldozers, or for that matter, if you provide financial services, which would be funding the building of apartment blocks or whatever it may be, we would urge people to take very close legal scrutiny of their decisions, because we think that they could be in profound jeopardy. And I would go a bit further, and I would say I would actively discourage any British businesses from being engaged in those settlement areas.
So if goods are identified as mislabelled, what steps are being taken to verify the origin of the goods?
I think that's one. No, HMRC, yes, it's a good, so it's crossing a border, and therefore it's Anna. Sorry.
Yes, so...
sorry, Joanne.
It's okay. So, importance seeking to claim preferential tariff treatment under the UK-Israel Trade and Partnership Agreement required to make a legal declaration confirming that the goods were not produced in any of the settlements listed as non-eligible locations, and that list of non-eligible locations is available on gov.uk. HMRC may initiate verification of origin checks on or after importation, and we do that on a list and intelligence-led basis. And in such cases, we may request further evidence from the importer, or, where necessary, initiate a formal verification process with the exporting authority. And where HMRC isn't satisfied that the goods meet the conditions for preferential tariff treatment, then that preferential tariff treatment is refused, and the goods are subject to the standard most favoured nation tariff rate.
Nobody believes that the controls on imports from occupied Palestinian territories are strong enough. And when we talk to groups who work on this, they say that it's HMRC and Foreign Office who are the problem. So we do not appear to be policing these imports effectively enough. Often all kinds of excuses are kicked up about the difficulty in labelling things, but it just does not seem that we are approaching this with the right vigour. We have recognised the state of Palestine, and yet we are permitting the economy of the state of Palestine to be undermined through the continued trade from illegal settlements. And it's just got to stop. And so where is the plan as part of the reconstruction of Palestine to completely take out any risk of imports from occupied Palestinian territory?
We haven't got a ban on the import of goods from settlement areas. I know that there's an argument for us to have such a ban, and it's one of the things, obviously, we keep under constant review.
But why haven't we got a ban?
Because we're keeping it under constant review.
How much more evidence do we need that the expansion and the behaviour of settlers is destroying the possibility of putting together a viable state of Palestine? I appreciate it's a Foreign Office lead on this, Sir Chris, but how much more evidence do we need?
Well, I think we need to take concrete steps, obviously in accordance with international law, which is one of the things we have to bear in mind, but to counter settlement expansion. That is something that the Minister for the Middle East and myself are considering at the moment, how we can best effect that. But I don't know whether the Foreign Office wants to say anything more. I think Hamish Faulkner answered a debate on this yesterday, on some of these elements yesterday.
No, I don't have anything to add to what you said.
I mean, Minister, given what you've just said, which I happen to completely agree with about your view of the occupied territories and the illegality of those settlements, it doesn't sit well that we are not then acting on exactly what your sentiments are, and it's not just sentiments, it's facts, and putting that ban in place, because many other countries now are, Spain and Ireland, Netherlands, Belgium and Slovenia are all heading down that pipe as well. We set an example in the UK, people look to us, and we are, I'm afraid, it feels like sitting on the fence.
Well, we could talk about the broader policy on Israel and Gaza, I suppose, at some length. That's not my particular area of responsibility. But I would just say that having looked a little bit at what Ireland and Spain are trying to do, who I think are really the front runners in this, they are struggling to create legislation that they think will work. So I would just issue a slight word of caution about that. I hear I've heard it in my office, and I hear it again today, the arguments that are made. Our aim of wanting to prevent settlement expansion is clear, and we've taken action. We're the only country, I think, that has sanctioned individual members of the Israeli government. We've taken, as the chair has already referred to, clear position on the recognition of Palestine, and we need to keep this whole subject under review.
Has the government considered the merits of a ban on goods from occupied Palestinian territories?
Not in the coherent way that I think you're asking me to stand up an argument around. But of course it's something that we've heard. People make an argument to us, and we're not deaf.
What steps can you now take further to this committee in reviewing whether a ban would be possible?
I'm afraid, Chair, you're not going to get any more out of me. It's not entirely my area of responsibility. And I think one of the things that I have two very, we took a position, for instance, as in the Foreign Office we were going to adjust, not in the Foreign Office, in DBT, that we were going to adjust we were going to suspend some of the licences because we believed, because the Foreign Office had made an adjudication that there was a real risk of Israel not abiding by international humanitarian law. So we suspended some licences under our export control system. We also suspended the FTA agreement with Israel, or process with Israel, because for that same reason. And I'm very keen at this moment to do everything I can to enable the ceasefire to hold, and for the people of all the people of Israel and Palestine to be able to have better lives. But I can't make it. I'm not making a commitment on behalf of the government around what we will or will not review.
Well, could you tell us what steps the UK authorities do currently undertake to ascertain whether an import originated from the occupied Palestinian territories and therefore shouldn't receive preferential treatment? What steps do you take today?
So those are the checks that I set out, that we undertake risk and intelligence based checks. We ask for further evidence. We may require a formal verification process, which with the exporting authority. If we're not satisfied as to the origin of those goods, then we will refuse the preferential tariff treatment, and we will charge the standard most favoured nation tariff rate, so they don't get the advantage of the improved tariff.
Yeah.
It might be helpful if we wrote to you to tell you how much that happens.
It would be incredibly helpful, because we've obviously written to you on the 12th of February.
And I apologise, you should have had
it.
I signed it off, but it hasn't got to you yet.
That would be helpful to receive. But let me just ask one further follow-up to this, which is that obviously if there's been a movement of goods from the occupied Palestinian territories to the United Kingdom, someone will have had to finance that. So it would be good to understand how you go about checking who may have financed the movement of such goods, and if indeed someone commits an offence, if they undertake the financing, whether that is through working capital or invoice factoring or whatever else?
It is always an offence to lie to HMRC.
You're satisfied that there are offences that should bite on those who are financing the movement of goods from the occupied Palestinian territories?
Anybody who lies about to HMRC about in a way that affects what tax they do or do not pay, or duty they do or do not pay, or tariff or whatever, that is I think I'm correct to
making an
think.
untrue declaration.
Yes. Thank you, Joe.
Then
that is an offence.
That is an offence. Yes.
Okay.
I've just one small point, which is not small ultimately, which is yes, the ceasefire has been declared. More than 600 people in Gaza have been killed since it.
Yeah.
So this is far from a ceasefire in practice.
Point taken.
Well, we've heard what you said about whether or when government might consider the merits of such a ban, and we look forward to the answer to the letter that we sent on the 12th of February.
We have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so...
Thank you. If there are any further questions?
Yes, so moving over to beneficial ownership, and at the moment we have got an improved situation in the UK, but it's pretty sub-satisfactory. And I particularly want to ask you around property owned by a UK company controlled by a trust and property owned directly by a trust, with a view to that information on beneficial ownership being accessible to the public. It's something the Europeans are now doing and we're not. We are doing it in every other shape and form of entity, but we're not doing it for that. And please correct me if I'm wrong.
No, I'm doing a sort of a slightly confused face, because I was about to answer you in relation to beneficial ownership and the overseas territories.
Which
I do know about, but I don't know about the problems that there may be in the UK. So I'm afraid this is something that I might have to write to you about. I wasn't aware that this was something that was... and all of my officials are looking as bewildered as me, so...
Well, and I'll the clerks, please correct me where I'm wrong, but as per the information we've received, if a property is owned directly by a trust, then there is no searchable register of trust beneficiaries recorded through the TRS. Where available, it can be requested by interested parties subject to a legitimate interest test, and that bit we really do not like. The applicant must demonstrate their involvement in investigating money laundering, and the information requested would advance an investigation, which is a pretty high bar. And it should just be in the public interest to have all this information available. So that's with regard to property owned directly by a trust. The second one, and there's only 2, is property owned by a UK company controlled by a trust. This information on public, the beneficial ownership accessible to the public, is not currently collected at all by Companies House. And then if it's a beneficial ownership known to the UK government, only the trustee of the trust need to be made known to Companies House. There is no obligation to report the beneficiary of the trust even to the UK government. So this is just game on for bandits.
I get all of that, and I'm in favour of as much transparency for the public as is possible and achievable. I'm not sure. I don't want to stray too far beyond my certain knowledge. So I'm afraid I will have to...
So we have a very helpful letter back from Minister Stephen Doughty and Blair McDougall on the 20th of February, which we published as a committee last night. Fairly helpful about the direction of travel, but we're supremely concerned that a number of Crown dependencies and overseas territories are basically slow-walking the publication of the beneficial ownership registers that they have promised to create. So we're kind of concerned about what you're doing to encourage them to finish the job. But second, there is a review that Baroness Hodge is undertaking on behalf of His Majesty's Government, but I don't think we've got a timetable for when that might be concluded.
No, well, as you will know, I think both you and I were involved in this debate back in 2008, 2009, 2010, and all the way through the 14 years of the other government. and it has been like pulling teeth trying to be able to get all of the overseas territories to sign up. I thought there was a moment in 2010 when we might be able to achieve it on the back of the 2008 financial problems, but we didn't. So Gibraltar, Montserrat and St Helena have publicly accessible registers of beneficial ownership in place, which is obviously a step forward. Cayman Islands and the Turks and Caicos have legitimate interest access registers in place. I fully take the point that that is nowhere near good enough, and we want to make sure that everybody gets to full openness. And at the Joint Ministerial Council, which Minister Doughty chaired in November 2025, Anguilla, Bermuda and the BVI, the British Virgin Islands, committed to continue with their plans to implement legitimate interest access registers. Again, we are still pressurising all of them to move towards full transparency. Just on Baroness Hodges, I don't know that I haven't got a timetable for that. She started in... she visited the BVI in 2025. You know this because it's in the letter. And sorry,
we'll write further to the questions.
If I may, I do think the Cayman was on that list, and I think Cayman is one of those big three, along with the BVI and Bermuda, who are the and you know, just to give a flavour, you might have seen the Guardian today. I mean, this matters. We've got 8 billion going through the BVI in essentially dodgy Russian stuff, another 4.4 billion in the BVI, and in the Cayman Islands it's somewhere in here and I can't find it immediately. Bermuda is 3 billion. So these are big chunky numbers, and you know, it is definitely on us to be...
No, I completely agree, and it's one of the things I've been committed to for a very long time. When I was Minister in the Foreign Office, I suspended the Turks and Caicos government because of allegations of corruption there, and oddly enough, I appointed Rob Rinder as the lawyer to deal with it. We as a government are committed to do everything we can. The powers that we have in relation to the overseas territories are relatively limited, except when they need to rely on our contingent liability provisions. I think sometimes it's a matter of trying to persuade people as much as anything else, and that's what Minister Doughty, I know, is actively engaged in. And I think that the work that Baroness Hodge did, both when she was a member of this House and now in her role, I hope will be able to deliver the goods.
Okay. That brings us to the conclusion of this session. Thank you very much indeed for the full and candid evidence that you have provided. Thank you very much indeed, in particular, for the update on the new legislation which you're planning to bring forward. That concludes this session. Order